Hi everyone, good evening. This is Dr. Sullivan. Very happy off a little snack of nuts that you might have just seen. Okay, so we are here, we are live, we are talking about the brain and how I care for the brain and how you're trying to care better for the brain. And we are coming together with good quality information, evidence-based recommendations to try to learn more so that way we can take better care of this very important part of our health. I am focusing tonight on coping and stress because it is a very common problem that we all struggle with, and it can certainly exacerbate medical issues that we've been talking about, especially anything related to the brain, because what are we using to cope but of course our brain. Coping has a lot to do with tolerating big emotions. It has a lot to do with cognitively being able to weigh the pros and the cons about our options. It has a lot to do with the resources that we have around us to help, and sometimes we don't have that much access to as much support as we would like. So it is really up to us to be able to figure out what is stressing me out, what specifically, and what is it that I can do, what is in my control to not be as stressed. So we're going to talk tonight about what's at stake when we aren't coping well. And the truth is that we're all stressed. I'm going to give you some statistics in a little bit that talk about how unbelievably, especially Americans are. And the truth is that we're all coping. The question is what you're doing hurting or helping? There are two really big differences in how people approach stress, and we're going to talk all about that tonight. We have to decide if we are going to try to do things differently, and that is the focus for me tonight, is to give you those tools to try to do that to the best of your ability. So I want to start off by asking you a question. On a scale of 0 to 10, how stressed out would you say you've been in the last month? This was a question that the American Psychological Association poses to a large group of people every year in what they call their annual stress survey. And in 2016 and 2018, the results were actually very similar. And what they found was 25% of Americans reported their stress level on the 0 to 10 scale as an 8 or above. 50% of people reported themselves as a score of 4 to 7. So this is 75% of the population basically saying that they are moderately to significantly stressed. This is really, really high. The problem with stress is the chemical, physiological reaction that it sets off in our body, which is called the fight or flight response. You might have heard that term before, but you've certainly felt those feelings before. So let's describe in detail exactly what they are, because that's really the harmful part of stress, is what is it doing to our body and what is it doing to our brain. So the fight or flight response really allows us to make split-second decisions so we can be at full capacity to respond to a stressor. And there's a series of brain events and chemical changes that get put into play once we perceive that something is a threat to us. So the very first thing that happens is there's a part of our brain called the amygdala, and this is basically a threat detector. And it is constantly scanning our environment to decide if what we are experiencing is harmful to us potentially in any way, physically harmful, emotionally, financially. It is always on the lookout to see, is there something here that I should be focusing on to reduce my risk of something bad happening. So once the amygdala decides that there's a threat, it's basically on. As soon as it's on, the stress response starts. And the very first thing that happens is we start to communicate with another part of the brain called the hypothalamus. And this is where all of the stress hormones like cortisol, you've probably heard of that one, and some neurotransmitters start to kick into gear. And what happens is there's kind of this coordinated series of events between the kidneys. It's pretty interesting, actually. We have these two adrenal glands that sit on top of our kidneys, and they're really responsible for the big release, the big dump of stress hormones that floods throughout our bloodstream. And the very first thing that happens is we actually get an increase in blood pressure and an increase in blood sugar. And this is because all of the blood in our body is actually going directly to the heart and to the biggest skeletal muscles, because if there is a threat that's impending, we need to be able to potentially fight. So we need to have all of our strength. We have to have all of our running ability. We have to be as strong as we possibly can in these moments to be able to get out of there. Interestingly, a very similar thing happens in our brain. And what that is the blood essentially goes to that middle part of the brain called the subcortical area, where that amygdala is, where that threat detector is, where all of our emotions really are based. And what this means, though, is physically you get some interesting symptoms that you might recognize, where especially your fingers and your hands get kind of tingly and numb. Does that ever happen to you? That's a sign that the blood is starting to rush to the heart. And in the brain, what happens is the blood goes from more of the thinking, kind of cognitive, cerebral part of the brain, and it goes more into the emotional center. And so you're literally not thinking straight when you're under a high amount of stress. And this is why it's not good to make big decisions when you're stressed. It's not really good to have a resolution of conflict when you're stressed, because you're not really in your thinking mind. I kind of think of it like an emotional hijack. And when we get to the recommendations, we're going to talk about how pausing when you are under a lot of stress is actually very smart. One of the worst things that we can do is kind of impulsively get into it with people, because we're all emotion and no restraint. And I know we've all experienced this a lot, and typically it gets us further in the hole of stress, hurts our relationships, and it's just generally not that good. The way the fight or flight response was designed is that when this threat passes, our physiology goes back to baseline. Now, the question I have for you today is that your experience of stress, that it's somewhat infrequent, and that when the stress is over, you pretty much go back to normal? No, right? The way I experience stress is kind of that it's there as at least a backdrop, if not right in front of me, a lot of the time. A lot of the time, whether or not it is, stress can be positive or negative. There's these stress charts that are really interesting. Life Inventory Stress Report, you can Google it. And it shows you the most stressful life experiences. Some of them are positive, like getting married, getting a new job. Of course, some of the most stressful ones are a medical crisis, a spouse dying. But the point is that it's not just doom and gloom things that cause us stress. It's anything that's novel, that's going to elicit a big reaction from us. It's basically anything that kind of impinges on us to do something. And we all have a lot of demands these days. So really what we're looking at here is chronic stress. Don't you think? It's not really something that comes up, oh, every couple weeks I feel some stress. No, not really. I think we're all struggling with a kind of a daily stress problem. And that's really where the issue comes in, is that when these stress hormones are ever present, there are physical, mental, and cognitive consequences that we are all paying. And I want to help you understand what these are. So physically, think about what happens to you when you're stressed. I mean, don't you carry that in your body? I mean, that's really the experience of stress. Anxiety and worry is very thought related, right? Oh my God, what's going to happen? What will I do? How will I prepare? Stress is really more of the stomach ache, the headache, the muscle tension, the fatigue, because you're literally walking around so tight all the time. Sleeping problems are very, very related to stress, because we all do something all day long that is the most unhealthy coping skill, which will be featured in just a few minutes, called avoidance. What we do is we avoid it mentally all day, and we're kind of shoving it down into our body. And when we put our head on the pillow at night, oh my gosh, it just comes right back to you, doesn't it? And the truth is, you're exhausted by the time you're going to bed at night. And so remember, you're not really thinking clearly when you're stressed. And so here you are tired. You don't have your best wits about you, and you're actually trying to sit there and solve all these problems. It's kind of a recipe for disaster, really. Physical issues like diabetes and high blood pressure are very linked to chronic stress. And doesn't that make sense? Once you understand the fight or flight response, the first thing that happens is your blood pressure goes up, and then your blood sugar goes up. So if you're chronically living in that realm, those things are going to become problematic for sure. Mentally, chronic anxiety gives us a lot of irritability, and that's because we're already up to here before we even start the day, right? And so when you are in a good mood and you're relatively unstressed, you notice this. You can withstand a lot of BS before you kind of break, and it's not pretty. But if you're chronically stressed, you're already waking up like up to here. And any, getting out of bed and stepping on a Lego, for all you parents out there, that could send you into the oblivion. Getting into traffic first thing in the morning, your coffee not being hot enough when you finally get to the cafe. These little things that we all know are, my God, we're so lucky this is our only problem in life. They can seem so big because we're already completely maxed out in terms of patience. The other thing, of course, is that kind of gnawing feeling of restlessness, of anxiety, not really ever being able to truly rest or relax. And that is because the nervous system is on like a 9. I think about this kind of visual a lot when I think about stress and anxiety, which is that when you are kind of simmering at a very high number, it's very easy to then boil over, right? And it's very, very hard to get that boiling pot down to lukewarm temperature or cool temperature. It takes a lot of hard work physically to get your nervous system to come down a couple notches. And that's why when we talk about chronic stress, we have to talk about stress prevention, not just what to do in the moment, but what to do as a regular self-care habit. So that way we're not just one step away from kind of losing it at any moment. Of course, what we do when we're stressed is we adjust our behavior to try to become unstressed. The brain, the spirit, is very, very smart. It doesn't want to be out of control, out of whack. It wants to be at homeostasis. It wants a baseline. It wants stability. So what we're all doing all day long is trying to change our physiology and our chemistry to get back to that baseline. And we do it with things like alcohol and sugar and carbohydrates and withdrawing from people because it's too stimulating. And really, these are just shots in the dark. They're really not going to get you far at all. And in fact, they're going to dig you deeper into that hole of stress. So let me teach you a little bit about how chronic stress affects the brain specifically, because this is, of course, why we're here, right? We have this shared mutual respect and interest for the brain. So this is very, very, very important. And very important to all my people out there who already have a brain health challenge like a stroke or Parkinson's or essential tremor or the myasthenia gravis folks. Stress exacerbates what you are already living with. And so I want you to hear this part loud and clear because it will motivate you to reduce the stress in your life. This isn't just about feeling better. This isn't just about quality of life, which are very important things. This is about brain cells. So cortisol, the primary stress hormone, absolutely in animal models and in human models damages brain cells. Okay, and basically what it does is, here's a big old brain cell, and these are the little branches, the dendrites. It basically shrivels up these little connectors, these little dendrites, and you still have the brain cell. It's not that it's killing brain cells, that's kind of a misnomer. It's damaging them so they can't be in as good of communication with other brain cells. Now with stress, this happens in 2 very specific parts of the brain. The first one is your prefrontal cortex, and this is the part of the brain that does the highest level cognitive activities, like, what separates us man from ape. It's the planning, it's the organization, it's the restraint. It's all of the most complicated things. It's called executive functioning that happens in this part of the brain because it's kind of like the executive of this business of your brain. It does all the wheeling and dealing. So it happens there, but also in the hippocampus, which is the memory centers of the brain. And I know so many of you are worried about memory. We also know that it causes premature brain aging. There is a difference between physically how we age, what we see on the outside, our skin quality, our muscle tone, our height, and the quality of the health of our brain. They're not necessarily one-to-one relationships. We also know that chronic stress dramatically increases your risk for cardiovascular and what we call cerebrovascular disease. And that just means the blood vessels that pump the vital fuel that your brain needs in order to live and thrive, which is oxygen and glucose. Those delivery systems get inflamed and closed when we have either cardiovascular disease or cerebrovascular disease. And that is related to diabetes, high blood pressure, all sorts of things that happen within the vascular system. But stress, that cortisol, what it basically does is it kind of sends our immune system into overdrive, and it never really gets a chance to calm down. And so we've got this inflammation that is no good at all. So we need to start talking about what to do about it, right? I always want to convince you of the problem, the challenge that we're trying to solve before we get to the solution, because we have to agree about what's at stake here, right? This isn't just, oh, isn't this kind of an interesting academic problem? This is the quality of your life, and this is the quality of your brain. So let's go back to the first step. So remember I said, and I chose my words very carefully, I said the first thing that happens in the stress response is that we perceive that a threat is in our environment, right? This decision, this perception happens either unconsciously or what we kind of call preconscious, which is like a split second. And we basically decide, is this a threat, yes or no? You actually have some control over this process. There is the event, there's the stressor, and then there is the stress response, the fight or flight response. In between there is this thing called appraisal. And this is the, is this a threat? Or I want you to start talking about stress in another way. Is this a challenge? Once your brain decides this is a challenge, it is a whole other physiological response, okay? Let's think about what happens when you decide it's a challenge. What happens is you have the potential for mastering it. It makes you feel kind of good, right? You know what? This is something that I think I can handle. I can grow here. There's just a certain confidence that we all have when we start talking about it as a challenge. When you start talking about it as a threat, the very first thing is you see the harm, you see the consequences, you see the loss. It's a very negative mindset. After that threat question, we then go to yet another unconscious, kind of barely conscious question, which is, what are my resources for dealing with this threat? Okay, how many options do I have? What are my resources? How am I going to get people to help me? If you feel like you have a good amount of resources that you will be effective in facing this threat, you actually feel less stress. If unconsciously, preconsciously, you start to think, I don't have the money for this, I don't have the people to come over and help me with this, I don't have someone to come over and comfort me. If you go through a series of thoughts and come up with not many resources, this is the highest level of threat, and those stress hormones are going to be at a disco, and they're going to be letting loose, and you are going to be very, very stressed. So one of the things that I have to get you to understand is that these gaps, remember stress, hormone response, is an opportunity. This is an opportunity. So I want you to think about when something happens, truly how dangerous is this? How much of a threat is this? Is it a challenge? Is it a threat? Maybe some things are truly threatening. When you get a letter from the IRS and it says, hey, by the way, you actually owe us $10,000 from 2 years ago and you weren't expecting that. Yeah, not a challenge. Definite threat to your checking account, no doubt about it. When you hear that your Parkinson's disease is advancing, this is a threat to your well-being. That's okay. It's appropriate to think about some threats as realistically threatening to you. But what you also can change is how prepared am I to handle it? What are my external and my internal resources for coping? And this is where we're going to turn our attention to next. So the first thing is, once you've realistically assessed the threat level, you have to start the coping process. And so I want to talk to you about the two primary categories of coping. The first one is avoidance, and that's what we would all love to do. This would be stick our head in the sand, put it in a box, put it in a black plastic trash bag, throw it over your shoulder, never see it again, don't think about it, don't talk about it, right? This is a little bit of a way of coping when people are extremely overwhelmed. You know that feeling, it's like, I can't even talk about this right now, it's stressing me out so bad. The problem is you're really not truly avoiding it, because remember, even though consciously it's leaving here, where is it going? It's going to come out because it's got to come out somewhere, right? The stomach aches, the headaches, the chronic fatigue, the irritability, the withdrawal. So we have to try to be in the other camp, which is approach. So we've got avoidance and we've got approach. Approach is basically going to decrease your stress, even though it might feel, especially when you first start to try to be more of an approach person, it might feel like it's making you more stressed out, but I promise you, when you become more of an active problem solver and not just, la 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 la, no, this stressful thing isn't happening, it's actually going to really, really help you in the long run. So the first step in this is that you have to just seek information that helps you truly understand what's happening. One of our biggest missteps is making assumptions, right? Is this person didn't hold the door for me because they secretly don't like me and they saw me coming and they just decided that, I wasn't worth it to hold the door, when really they could have had an appointment, a very important appointment that they had to go to. We can't fill in the gaps. We really need to be better communicators, and that's actually my big point that I want to make in a few slides from now, which is that we have to figure out how to be better communicators, because when we assume, you know how that goes, right? There's a really good saying about that. You make something out of you and me, and nobody wants that. So first thing is to seek information and not make assumptions. The next thing is to actually restrain yourself from responding when you're feeling a lot of stress, because remember, the emotional hijack, you're literally not thinking good and you have to hold back. While you're holding back and you're cooling off and you're coming to your senses, you're also going to be planning. And the plan has to be, what is reasonably within my control that I can change? That is your island of focus. Not something I can control. What I'm going to have to do is let go and work on acceptance, because that is not my piece. My commitment to myself is responsibility for my actions, for my feelings, and I have to figure out what part in this stressor is me and my issue and how I can respond, and what is the other person. And this is to all these steps, guys. Don't think you're going to figure this out tonight. This is a lifelong process here. So my first recommendation to you is to ask questions, right? Don't assume anything. Don't think that you're a mind reader, okay? There's these things called cognitive distortions, and one of the biggest ones is thinking that we're mind readers. Oh, I know exactly why he did that. You really don't. You really need to ask questions. So we have to talk about communication. And most of us swing back and forth between two poles, which we all know as passive aggressive, because most of us want to avoid. Naturally, we don't want conflict. We don't want people to not like us. God forbid someone, says something bad about us that makes us feel really uncomfortable and really unloved, and nobody wants that. So we all are a bit passive. But guess what? Does not work in the long run. And what happens inevitably? You blow up at something and you become aggressive. So what we have to talk about is, what is the sweet spot between passive and aggressive? That is the magical word called assertive. And this is what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's just talk a little bit though about passive communication, because we all do it. Let's not act like we're better than this. It really is a pattern of avoiding expressing your opinions or your feelings. And really what you're doing is completely protecting the other person, and you're really serving their needs, what their needs are, what their wants are. It's very selfless. But the problem is that the issues that you have with the person builds, and this is where we get into resentment, and eventually there's an outburst, and maybe it's over something kind of minor, but really the person's been simmering for a long time, and then there's shame and there's guilt and confusion, and they feel bad, and so they kind of go back to being passive. We also have people who are a little bit more aggressive, and these people, I think, it's a little bit more rare, thank God, because they can be very difficult to deal with. But basically, the way they communicate is kind of me, and it really violates the rights of other people. They're kind of taking all the respect for themselves. And these people, you know, they kind of use like humiliation to criticize people a lot, blame people, attack people. They can kind of speak in a way that's very domineering, make it really hard for passive people to speak up for their own rights. They're not really great listeners. They tend to kind of interrupt a lot. Those are pretty extreme though, but most of us, I know it's hard to admit this. Really, the truth is that most of us can be passive aggressive. So we kind of have to talk about this to say, oh, right, there's that thing I just did, or there's that thing my friend just did to me. The problem with passive aggressive is that it looks like we're going with the flow, but the truth is inside we are PO'd and we are subtly and indirectly using sarcasm and you know, muttering to ourselves, making faces when the person walks away. We kind of look like we're being cooperative, but the truth is we're sabotaging, and we're kind of making sure things don't really work out because we're really mad. There's a lot of anger with passive aggressiveness that we're not expressing directly. So the problem though is when we do this a lot, we kind of become alienated from people, and we basically become powerless and kind of stuck because we're either right passive, not getting our needs met, or aggressive, we blow and then we feel bad and then we go back to, so it's nothing, you're spinning. So the problem though is it's really related to chronic stress. So we have to talk about the alternative. And the problem with assertive communication is that so few of us are taught these skills, and they are skills. It doesn't come naturally to us. So if what I'm about to say feels like, oh my gosh, that might be hard for me to do, just recognize it's a journey and it's a set of skills that you're trying to learn about, and that's okay. So assertive communication is where you clearly state your opinions and your feelings. You are advocating for your rights as much as you want to respect the rights of the other person. It's really the sweet spot between not taking all of the rights for yourself, but also not giving them all away to the other person. And so basically, you really have to be an advocate for yourself. So it can be defined as direct, honest, and appropriate ways of standing up for your rights while respecting the rights of others. So what does assertiveness look like, right? This magical land of assertiveness. Really, it's really clear communication. It's not getting too worked up. It's kind of a little bit matter of fact. It's being a good listener, you know, having good eye contact, listening what the other person is saying, but not getting so emotionally attached to what they're saying that then you feel bad about what you want to say. You feel competent, you're in control, you're not being manipulated, you're not being shut down because someone else gets kind of riled up with you. You're really standing up for your rights in a way that is not harmful to someone else, but you're also not denying your right to your experience, to have your feelings. So let's just think of a couple phrases that might be helpful if someone out there, I don't know, you or me, is practicing this assertive communication thing, okay? So how about this one? I'm just not comfortable with what you just asked. I don't know, I just feel like it doesn't work for me. Or I'm gonna have to think a little bit about joining that club because I'm just not sure that it's something that I wanna do right now. You know, I really don't like it when I see you talking about other people behind their backs because it makes me feel like you might do that to me one day. You know, I really respect your opinion on this subject. I can see that you're really passionate about it. I would just really appreciate that same respect in return, right? So it's really not that hard. People actually take it really, really well. It's just that when you're not used to doing it, it almost sounds like, oh gosh, am I being too bossy here? Am I being too demanding? But no, I promise you, you will actually feel awesome once you start communicating. And when people start expecting these kind of responses from you, I really feel like you don't get taken for granted as much. People don't, you know, the thing is with people that do things, that people that show up, is that you get drained by people's requests because, oh, she did this committee, you know what, I need help on this committee, and oh, we got the town yard sale coming up and she would really be happy to go around and collect all the donations. you know, at a certain point when you're a pleaser, it's like enough is enough. You just can't keep doing. And so sometimes you just have to say no, and that's really hard for some of us. So let's kind of wrap up the coping skills, and then we're going to talk about stress prevention before we go, because we got to get this nervous system to be a little bit more calm. So the first thing is you're going to view stress as a challenge that you can handle. You're going to work on figuring out what are your external and your internal resources to help you when you're down and out. You're going to not avoid emotions or conflict. You're going to try to use assertive communication to let your experience be known and also to respect the experience of other people. And you're going to practice stress prevention. So stress prevention is really made up of three things. The first one is prioritizing sleep. When we talk about the brain, sleep is like right there as the close second in terms of health behaviors that really make a difference. You want to get long extended periods of sleep almost every single night, and if you're not able to do that, you really need to be actively working on that as something that you're trying to get better about. The next one is exercise. There are anti-stress hormones that get released. These are what endorphins are, right? So they can get in there and kind of get all the junky stress cortisol ones away. The stronger you feel physically, the more fit you feel physically, the more you literally feel capable of managing stress. But the other thing is that it really helps to calm the nervous system, because it's kind of helping us excrete some of those stress hormones, and there is like a resetting physiologically that happens after exercise. Which brings us to our third and our final recommendation, which is you have to find ways to calm your nervous system. When you're out in the world and you're working, or you're at the doctor's office, or you're at rehab, the truth is life is coming at us a mile a minute, and it is inherently stressful. We have to counter those stressful times with extended periods of calm, visual calm, internal calm, spiritual calm. And we might need some help to do this. And so I wanted to tell you about 2 resources that are free. You know, that's my whole thing, is I want to find free brain health things that work for you guys, because I really don't think that it needs to be a big expense. I think there's a lot of resources out there that we just don't talk about enough. 2 really cool things. One I've used a lot, and one I'm new to, so I'm going to try to use it in the future. But the first one is called, it's a free app called Insight Timer, and it's the largest library of guided meditations on earth, they say. That's their tagline. Guided meditations are so awesome because it's basically someone walking you through the steps of relaxing. If you're chronically stressed, I'm going to take a bet that you might not be the best relaxer in the world. I use guided meditation a lot after a busy day of seeing patients and having a lot of feelings and talking a lot and just being kind of on all day. I really need help in trying to settle down before bed, and these guided meditations are so awesome because there's usually like some calm, relaxing music that's really good for my brain, good for my spirit, but the content that they talk about is so psychologically helpful. You know, even something as simple as, there's nothing you need to do right now. Just focus on relaxing. I mean, it's amazing the power of those words. But they also touch on themes like, you know, your purpose in life and what are you contributing to society in a way that doesn't make you feel like it's another pressure. It actually makes you feel really connected to yourself. So I think that would be awesome. The other thing is actually this woman who I just love, who has a podcast, a Facebook page. She actually has an app, I'm almost sure. Her name is Tara Brach. Her last name is B-R-A-C-H, so it's tarabrock.com. Sometimes my issue with guided meditations is I sometimes think that the person talking sounds kind of corny, and I kind of can't like relax and get into it because I'm like laughing, or I don't know, it just doesn't like work for me. So their voice is really important on these people because that's the tool they're using to calm you. I just find her voice to be very pleasant, but she's extremely smart and emotionally intelligent, and the meditations that she talks about, the topics are just so beautifully moving and like truly resonate with me, and really have helped me to get further from anxiety issues that I've had, to find peace, and to really get back to my center. And that's basically what we're talking about with chronic stress, right? Is it gets us so far away from ourselves. When you're stressed, are you grounded? It's like the opposite, right? You're just like, that's why as a neuropsychologist, people will come to see me with, they think are memory problems, but it really turns out they can't focus or attend, and it's really related to chronic stress, because that's the experience. You're just kind of like open, lens, just taking everything in, but you can't really sit with something. There's not really a chance to reflect, because that's just not how the energy of stress is. It's very fast and shallow. And so meditation can really help you kind of get grounded and come back to your center. So that's everything for tonight. We are going to keep focusing on mental health in March. Next Wednesday at 6, I'm going to talk about a really interesting topic: post-traumatic stress disorder after a medical crisis. We used to think that PTSD really only happened after someone who went to war or someone who had been assaulted, but we now know that it's a bona fide issue that happens to people who have unexpected medical traumas, and I know that a lot of you listening have gone through this, so I really want to address that and try to help you understand a little bit more. I would love to interact with you guys on this lecture and have you, I don't know it all, I'm just trying to do my best. I truly believe that people are out there with answers too, and I would love you to teach me and teach other people who are listening to this post. So please share anything that you found helps you cope a little bit better, a little bit more positively. Sharing this lecture is really a wonderful way to get this positive psychology information out in the world. If you found that it was helpful for you, I would love for you to share it on your page or any groups that you belong to. That would be awesome. So thank you guys so much, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.